Well, first let me start by saying thank you for your hospitality and for inviting me here, because it's rare that a film producer gets a chance to explain where he came from and why he does what he does. I think storytelling is at the root of all our cultures, and I think that storytelling as a part of the Middle East culture is largely overlooked in the West. And one of the reasons I got so interested in what you were doing here and what started in Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago was because I grew up in a culture that had no television and no cinema. I lived in a little tiny town of 5,000 people in northern Quebec. This is in the early 40s. And we had no cinema, no television. My father was a storyteller, and I had a very bad stutter, and he made me tell stories as a means of overcoming my stutter. And if you're patient, I'll stutter for you a bit later. And I realized that we were able to develop a sense of our own history, a sense of our own geography, a sense of ourselves, because we talked to each other. We read poetry, we told jokes. We told a lot of jokes. We mainly told jokes, not too much poetry. I was then trained as an engineer, and I was not good at it. I then became a banker. I was not good at it. I kind of failed upwards, and it was completely by accident that a corporate sponsor helped me find my true calling. The corporate sponsor was Mohammed Al-Fayed, an Egyptian businessman living in London, and he was effectively the corporate sponsor of our first film, which was called Chariots of Fire, which was produced by a good friend of Jitesh, a man by the name of David Putnam. And the reason I am here today is because a corporate sponsor, without wanting his name on the film, decided he was going to put up half the money for what became an iconic film. That same inspiration carried me through to many, many more films. I think of the 60-odd films that our company has been involved in, well over half have been sponsored in some way or another by corporate sponsors or by individuals. And in only the very rarest case do they ask for any kind of public recognition or any kind of profit share that is above and beyond what would normally come to anyone who's investing. And as a result, over the years, we've made films such as Gandhi, such as The Killing Fields, The Mission, Hope and Glory, Dances with Wolves, Driving Miss Daisy, River Runs Through It, all films which have a very strong storytelling culture. You'll note none of those films could be classified as remakes or sequels or gross-out comedies or even animated kids' movies. These are all films that carry a very strong cultural message and which are essentially storytelling. And I think that the role of corporations in storytelling must increase. My last experience doing this was with a man called Jeff Skoll, who was one of the first employees of eBay, who at the age of 35 decided he could retire and do something good with his money. And the first thing he did was to create an Arabic language version of our film Gandhi. We employed 110 actors in Ramallah. We spent 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars and created a film which we then toured throughout Palestine, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, specifically aiming at young people, specifically talking about nonviolence, trying to find a way to bring Gandhi's message to an audience that would never have seen this film. Currently, we're working on a project called the Peacemakers, which involves young Israelis and young Palestinians working together behind the scenes without any fanfare to create a basis for peace in the Middle East. Finally, tomorrow night you'll have a chance to see a film called Journey to Mecca, which is an attempt with entirely corporate sponsorship to explain the Hajj to Western audiences. It has been phenomenally well received in many, many countries. We still have difficulty getting it accepted in the USA, which is our biggest challenge. We will probably continue to show the film in the USA and other parts of the world for the next 10 or 20 years. But without corporate sponsorship, that film would never have been made. And I am convinced that relatively small amounts of money spent in the right way to create that kind of media will have an enormous impact on the major ills of the world, peace being the biggest single challenge that we have. But Also poverty. I think poverty, in fact, is the greatest form of violence, as Gandhi said. And without the kind of corporate sponsorship that we're talking about, I don't think you can get that message across. So that's why I'm here, and I'm happy to participate with you in this.
Okay, I have a couple of follow-up questions, if I may. You raised some phenomenally interesting points. There's always this question when it comes to development of programs with a corporate sponsor. For example, the DIFC is a sponsor of the program that I host, and they don't have editorial involvement, although the perception is that they may have editorial involvement, which doesn't exist. How do you draw the line on what the role of the corporate sponsor is in the development of content, and then when do they say, well, that's not exactly what I was thinking, Jake, I know you're very creative, but you have to come back and water it down a bit. Does that happen?
There's always a balance. Let me give you a case in point. Total Oil Company was one of our major sponsors on a recent film called Oceans, which, no surprise, was about the oceans. And the film took 7 years to make. We had many other sponsors, including the royal family of Abu Dhabi. And we had 14 other major sponsors. The only sponsor that gave us any difficulty whatsoever was Total. Why? Because Total is an offshore oil company. And clearly they were very worried that we were going to start talking about oil pollution and all the ills of the ocean. But you don't need to talk about this stuff. Everybody knows it. Everybody is completely aware of the fact that many companies, not just Total, many companies are guilty of polluting the ocean. So we tell them, we'd love to have your money. We'll put your name on the film, but you have to accept that we are reasonable people and that you can't ask an artist to create a piece of art if it's directed by the sponsor. So it's always a delicate moment, but we've never, ever lost a sponsor because of the content. And it's just a question of being able to clearly explain what the objectives are, and ultimately, if there's a major problem, we will always fix it. But we've never had a major problem. And that's the way artists work. Artists understand that they have to work with their sponsors if they have a chance of doing their next film, for sure, but even doing this one.
Okay, good. Final question here, if I may. I wanted to go back to my original introductory thoughts to you, and that is the role of Abu Dhabi's taken a very different approach to the development of a media zone. They said they're not so interested in having the brand names there and putting a placard up on a building, but actually to have those major brands creating content and then transferring that creativity to the local society, so to create jobs and to create new clusters that we were talking about with Jitesh here. What's been the experience so far in trying to make that happen? It looked grand, but is it actually a reality? It seems to be so far.
Well, first of all, the objective was to bring in multiple sponsors, not just a few, and in multiple disciplines. So we had publishers, filmmaking companies, television companies, internet companies. We had a wide variety of companies, but my focus was on the filmmaking group and on the film content. And the result was really 3 separate pools of capital, one with National Geographic, to create films which are basically wildlife, educational, cultural, historical, stories which suit the general objective, help our planet. And that's a fairly broad objective. The second group was Jeff Skoll's company, Participant Media, and those films are meant to be, are designed to have a social outreach component. So they deal with unemployment, they deal with poverty, they deal with loss of culture, they deal with issues where you can create a social outreach program, which is usually viral, not exclusively, but usually viral. And the third area is anything which can be in some way attached to clean technology. And that media is actually expanding rapidly. It's almost entirely viral, internet-based. It's quite difficult to make a feature film about clean tech. But if you could imagine what you can do with the right kind of educational outreach program directed at the polluters of this world, then you can see how all 3 tie together. It's basically a content business, and in every case, we try and bring in local content, local emirate content, either in the form of filmmakers or writers or physical presence on the set. We don't necessarily shoot our films in the Emirates, at least not all of them, but we always have an Emirati attachment to it. And I think we should do the same thing here and in other parts of the Middle East. We've done it already in Morocco.
Great. Thanks very much.